The town of Oak Haven settled early under the autumn sky. Here, the days shortened with an almost brutal efficiency, wrapping the solid, turn-of-the-century homes in deep shadow by late afternoon. Elara Thorne, a woman whose life had become defined by gentle routine, knew the architecture of her own house intimately, but lately, she felt estranged from its emotional geography. She had lived in this house for 6 years, since marrying Arthur Thorne. It was a space built for connection, a broad kitchen island, a living room with generous, welcoming sofas, yet, lately, it accommodated nothing more than silence. Arthur, a good and steady husband, had been pulled into the high-demand vacuum of his consulting firm, often leaving the house to feel like a perfectly maintained ship sailing without a destination. But it was the silence from the corner bedroom upstairs that truly preoccupied Elara. Reese, her 24-year-old stepson, had returned home 3 months prior, degree in hand, carrying the invisible weight of transition. He was polite, almost excessively so, treating Elara with the kind of distant courtesy usually reserved for a valued colleague. He was navigating the choppy, disillusioning waters of postgraduate job hunting, a struggle Elara understood but could not access. He was a vessel holding too much pressure, and the sound of his forced composure had become the most dissonant note in the house. That Tuesday evening, as Elara wiped down the granite counters after a meal eaten in solitary quiet, the house felt particularly off. The usual low hum of electronics or the distant pulse of music was absent. Reese's withdrawal had become absolute. She found herself moving with deliberate purpose, preparing a simple bowl of warm, spiced tomato soup, a comfort food she often turned to when the world felt too sharp. It was an excuse, a diplomatic gesture to check on the quiet struggle she sensed was unfolding behind his closed door. She carried the bowl up the curving, carpeted staircase, the scent of the soup a fragile offering against the escalating chill of the house. Just checking in, she told herself. He probably hasn't eaten since lunch. But beneath the caretaker's logic, a deeper anxiety thrummed. She didn't want to overstep, she only wanted to reassure him that his failure, or his perceived failure, didn't diminish his worth. She stopped at his bedroom door. It wasn't fully shut, just a fraction of an inch ajar. A thin strip of warm, yellow light stretched across the dark wood floor of the hall. Without intending to, purely out of that parental reflex to know, she looked. What she saw was quiet devastation. Reese was hunched over his desk, his usually immaculate hair mussed, his shoulders curved inward like a protective shell. His laptop illuminated a screen filled with scrolling text. Beside it, a graveyard of empty coffee mugs stood sentinel over a scattering of envelopes. The cold, corporate blue of formal stationery, rejection letters, was unmistakable. He wasn't crying loudly or raging. He was just still, staring at the screen with an intensity that suggested every word he read was extracting a piece of his resolve. She watched as he rubbed his face with both hands, dragging them down slowly, as if wiping away an invisible residue of fatigue and shame. Then came the sound, a quiet, shaky exhalation of breath, more painful than any sob. It was the quiet kind of sadness, the kind people carry alone because they fear making their struggle a burden on anyone else. Reese was fighting a battle of expectations, convinced that success was a speed contest, and he was failing to keep pace. Elara felt a stinging guilt, realizing how easily she had accepted his polite assurances of "I'm fine" over the past weeks. She had been respecting his space, but perhaps she had also been neglecting his pain. She retreated slightly, giving him a moment before the tap. She didn't want him to think he was being watched, only that he was being seen. She gave a soft, gentle rap on the wood. Chapter 2, Breaking the Seal. Reese's reaction was immediate and startled. He flinched, quickly swiping something off his screen, turning toward the door with an instant, practiced mask of composure. He offered a strained, forced smile, though his eyes were tired and distinctly red from the laptop's unforgiving glare. Elara stepped into the room, holding the soup like a fragile truce offering. Elara, warm, soft, just a little something. It's too cold to skip dinner entirely. He thanked her, a simple, muffled sound that held more obligation than gratitude. He waved vaguely at the stack of books and papers on his desk, the unspoken evidence of his tireless, yet fruitless, effort. The job rejection letters were now half hidden by a legal pad, but the glow of the open inbox was still visible on the screen. Elara set the bowl down on the clear space. She looked from the laptop to the scattered envelopes, then met his tired eyes. She didn't rush. She didn't lecture. She simply spoke the truth of her observation. Elara, quiet, unhurried, Reese. You don't have to do all of this alone. That simple sentence, delivered without judgment, seemed to shatter the thin wall he had maintained for weeks. He tried to brush it off. I'm fine, Elara, really, just a long day of networking, but his voice cracked on the final syllable. It was the only sound she needed to hear. He dropped his guard, the fight leaving his frame. He admitted his exhaustion, his acute embarrassment at returning home without a clear path, and the crushing weight of disappointment. Reese, low, raw, it's like every email, every one of those damn letters, just tells me I'm not enough. And I didn't want to be. A disappointment. To Dad. To you, I thought if I just kept trying, kept working late, no one would notice I was failing. Elara felt her heart seize. He hadn't seen himself as a son or stepson who was struggling, he had seen himself as a burden who needed to hide his inadequacy. She pulled the desk chair closer, ignoring the clutter, and sat quietly. She let him talk, letting his frustration and fear flow out without interruption. He spoke about the immense, self-imposed pressure, the expectation to launch seamlessly into a high-paying career, to immediately justify his education, to keep pace with friends whose social media feeds painted impossibly successful narratives. He confessed that the fear of seeming lazy or unprepared was more terrifying than the failure itself. He had been applying for everything, driven by panic rather than purpose, meticulously logging his failures so no one could doubt his effort. Elara listened carefully, absorbing every word. She saw the courage in his vulnerability, the immense strength it took for a young man convinced he needed to be self-sufficient to admit he was drowning. Elara, steady, gentle, Reese, I need you to hear this. No one, not your father, and certainly not me, expects perfection. We expect effort and we expect honesty. And you are exhausting yourself on both counts. Trying is not a sign of weakness, it's the definition of human. And needing help does not make you a burden. It makes you someone we love, who is struggling. You have worked yourself into a frenzy trying to protect us from your struggle. That stops now. She paused, letting the truth settle between them. Elara, we'll figure out the next step. Together. But first, you eat that soup, and you sleep. And tomorrow, we stop applying for jobs you don't actually want, and we start looking for one that genuinely excites you. No more hiding. A long, slow breath escaped Reese, deeper and more cleansing than the shallow, stressed gasps she'd heard earlier. It was the first breath of true relief he'd taken in weeks. She watched the tension drain from his shoulders, and she saw a flicker of the old spark, the determination that wasn't born of panic, but of purpose, return to his eyes. That night, Elara walked back down the hallway, the empty soup bowl in her hand. The house was still quiet, but the silence was fundamentally altered. It was no longer a sign of avoidance, but a space that had been cleansed by shared truth. Reese wasn't alone anymore. And Elara realized that in reaching out to him, she had taken a necessary step into a deeper role in his life, a role beyond polite stepmother. She had become his confidant, his partner in the struggle. The small crack in the silence was the beginning of his, and perhaps their, healing. Chapter 3, The Collaborative Dawn. Sound of a gentle acoustic guitar riff, morning light deemed the next morning, Elara felt the quiet determination lingering in her bones. She walked into the kitchen, half expecting Reese to be sleeping in, retreating back into his fortress of solitude. Instead, she found him at the kitchen island, his posture still tired, but definitely upright. His laptop was open, and a notebook was spread before him, filled with hastily scribbled concepts. He looked up quickly, a flash of defensiveness in his eyes, the embarrassment of being caught working, of showing his effort, but Elara disarmed it with a genuine, gentle smile. She poured him a cup of hot, herbal tea and sat across from him. This moment felt fragile, a newly formed bubble of trust that needed careful, quiet handling. She didn't start with critiques. She started with aspirations. Elara, encouraging, reflective, tell me, Reese, honestly. What did you think you were supposed to be doing right now? Not what you were applying for, but what goal you were chasing. He admitted he had been chasing an image, a success story defined by LinkedIn and his father's expectations, rather than a fulfilling career. He confessed he felt zero connection to the half-dozen finance positions he'd applied for, he just felt an obligation to appear successful, immediately. Reese, slightly wry, I was chasing a title. I thought that's what a 24-year-old was supposed to do. Anything less felt like admitting I wasted 4 years of tuition. Elara nodded. Chasing everything isn't the same as building something meaningful, she said, her voice grounded. Your worth isn't measured by the speed of your progress. Your years weren't wasted. They gave you skills. They gave you perspective. But we need to use them on a path that feels like yours. They spent the next hours in intense, collaborative work. They dismantled his existing resume, cutting out the language that sounded generic and replacing it with details about his genuine passions, the design project he completed in college that won an award, the volunteer tutoring he did, the skills he used but didn't recognize as valuable, like complex organization and high-level problem solving. Every time he spoke about a project he genuinely enjoyed, Elara watched his shoulders ease a little more. The fog of panic began to clear, replaced by the sharp, focused energy of creativity. During a break, as they were laughing over a particularly stiff, corporate phrase he'd used, Rhys closed his laptop and looked at Elara with a sincerity that caught her off guard. Rhys, earnest, direct, you're always doing this, Elara. You show up for everyone. You fix things, you lift people up, you make life easier for Dad and for me. But when do you let someone help you? The question hit her with an unexpected force. She wasn't prepared for the focus to shift. She tried to deflect it with a small, practiced smile. I'm the designated strong one, Rhys. My job is to be the anchor. But he didn't look away. Rhys, anchors need maintenance too. Who's checking your lines? His honesty was unsettling. Elara couldn't remember the last time she had genuinely handed over her own worries, her own quiet dissatisfactions, to someone else. She had spent so many years building a reliable, supportive structure for everyone around her that she had forgotten what it felt like to be supported. Listening to Rhys, and being challenged by him, was the unexpected key to her own quiet crisis. Guiding him reminded her of her own struggles after her first marriage ended, the slow, painstaking process of rebuilding her confidence in her life. But somewhere in the years of becoming Arthur's wife and Rhys's stepmother, she had learned to keep her emotions quiet, choosing routine over the risk of possibility, choosing duty over personal desire. Rhys's simple question, a challenge delivered by the very person she was trying to lift, resonated deeply. She realized she had been living on autopilot, moving through days without true connection to her own desires. She thought about the things she had set aside, the oil painting she wanted to try, the long dormant friendships, the simple joy of an afternoon spent without an agenda. She had allowed her own life to shrink while tirelessly lifting everyone else's. By the late afternoon, they had a clear, targeted strategy, 3 specific companies Rhys genuinely admired, a carefully curated portfolio, and a scheduled run-through of interview answers. Rhys seemed lighter, animated by a goal that felt true to him, not imposed upon him. Elara felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not the shallow satisfaction of a task completed, but the warmth of a bond deepened. She didn't just feel like a stepmother or a wife, she felt like someone who mattered. Later, stepping out onto the porch to breathe the crisp air, Elara reflected on Rhys's words. Who's checking your lines? She had been so busy being the anchor, she'd forgotten to look up at the horizon. She felt a quiet, unfamiliar yearning, a soft, growing desire to rediscover the version of herself who still believed in new beginnings, whose happiness wasn't dependent on the functional stability of others. The quiet, meaningful exchange with Rhys hadn't just healed his doubt, it had awakened a dormant restlessness in her own soul. The moment had arrived for her to step out of the shadows and seek a glimmer of her own. Chapter 4, The Copper Kettle. Sound of the cafe bustle, low chatter, the hiss of the espresso machine voiceover. The morning after their intensive session, Elara woke with a strange mix of satisfaction and restlessness. Rhys had gone for a run, a sign of restored energy and discipline. He was back on his feet, but Elara felt a subtle pull in her own chest, the reminder that she had spent too long pouring from an empty vessel. She decided, impulsively, to take a morning off. No chores, no planning, no domestic obligations. Just herself, her coat, and the quiet promise of something unexpected. She chose the Copper Kettle, a small, independent cafe tucked away on a cobblestone side street, the kind of place she had driven past countless times, always meaning to stop, but never quite fitting into the rigid framework of her daily routine. The moment she stepped inside, the warm, complex aroma of roasted beans and cinnamon enveloped her. It was a comforting chaos of low chatter and the gentle, rhythmic percussion of the espresso machine. Elara found a small, weathered table by the window, letting the calm bustle of life wash over her. She pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, intending to jot down reflections, but mostly, just savoring the act of existing without immediate purpose. The small moment of tranquility was broken when her keys slipped from her grasp, clattering loudly onto the polished wood floor. Before she could bend to retrieve them, a hand appeared from the adjacent table, smooth and capable. Elias' voice is warm, slightly deeper, with a hint of genuine amusement. Quite the distraction, those. You look like you're trying to solve the riddle of the universe this morning. Elara looked up, meeting a pair of warm, clear hazel eyes. The man, mid-40s, wearing a comfortable, slightly paint-splattered sweater, had a calm, attentive presence. He handed her the keys, his smile gentle, making her feel instantly noticed, yet strangely unguarded. He introduced himself as Elias, a local artist and architect who often escaped the intensity of his studio by spending mornings at the kettle. They began talking easily, effortlessly, about the weather, the absurd precision required in making coffee, the peculiar shape of the clouds. Elias had an energy that was quiet and deep, not demanding, but profoundly attentive. Elara found herself relaxing, the unfamiliar sound of her own light laughter bubbling up without effort. She shared small, curated pieces of her life, the recent intensity of helping Reese, the quiet routine she had maintained for years, the small joys and minor frustrations she usually kept tucked away. Elias listened without judgment, a steady focus in his gaze that made her feel truly seen. Every word she spoke seemed to matter in a way it hadn't in years. Elias, thoughtful, it's easy to become the fortress, isn't it? The one who keeps the walls up so everyone inside feels safe. But fortresses eventually need someone to check the foundation. His insight was unnerving. He had, in one sentence, articulated the quiet, decades-long choice she had made. The ease with which he understood her made the small wall she had built around her own feelings feel unnecessary, gently dissolving in the warm air of the cafe. The conversation naturally turned to Reese. Elara spoke of him with quiet pride, respecting his privacy but admitting how his struggle had forced her to look inward. She confessed how she had spent so long giving support that she had forgotten how to receive it. She explained that seeing him overcome his fear had reminded her of her own neglected desire for connection and growth. Elias listened, nodding thoughtfully. He spoke about his own work, the painstaking process of bringing an abstract design to life, and the patience required to manage creative failure. He didn't offer advice, he simply offered companionship, a partnership of attention and respect that made her feel valued as a woman with her own hopes, not just a function in someone else's life. As the morning slipped into the afternoon, Elara realized that this unexpected connection was awakening something she hadn't anticipated, a longing for companionship, laughter, and connection on her own terms. The way Elias looked at her, attentive, respectful, genuinely curious, stirred a soft, glowing hope. Eventually, they had to part, but not before exchanging numbers. Walking back toward home, the cool air felt invigorated. Elara felt the shift inside her more clearly than ever. Helping Reese had given her purpose, but meeting Elias had awakened her potential. She realized that chasing her own joy didn't diminish her love or care for her family, it added depth to her presence. She was still smiling softly when she reached her driveway, aware of the quiet anticipation for their next meeting. It wasn't about drama or reckless excitement, but the simple, profound thrill of being noticed, and the quiet courage it took to step outside her familiar role. She thought about Reese's question, "When do you let someone help you?" And she realized that Elias, in his gentle, unassuming way, was showing her what that could look like, a mutual space for care and attention. That evening, the house felt subtly lighter, the quiet no longer a burden but a canvas. Elara knew that the moment of healing for Reese had led directly to a moment of renewal for her. She had taken the first step toward waking up a part of her life that had been silent for too long, embracing the possibility of happiness that she deserved. The house now hummed with a different kind of energy, focused, electric, and quietly optimistic. The fear that had once paralyzed Reese had been channeled into purpose. He had spent the remaining hours of the day, and the entirety of the next morning, finalizing the portfolio they had meticulously redesigned. Elara found him at the kitchen island, tie cinched tightly around his neck, laptop open, practicing his interview cadence in a low, controlled voice. He still possessed a residual nervousness. She saw it in the slight tremor of his hands, the way he occasionally glanced toward the door as if expecting rejection to physically materialize. But now, it was the nervousness of a challenger, not a victim. Reese, to himself, rehearsing, and I believe my approach to human-centered design, specifically addressing the user journey, aligns perfectly with the ethos of your firm, the Labyrinth. Elara sat nearby, sipping tea, acting as a silent, grounding presence. She didn't interrupt, but after Reese finished his run-through, she offered a single, insightful critique. Elara, encouraging, analytical, you're strong on the what and the how, Reese. But don't forget the why. Why this firm? Why does their specific work resonate with the passion you rediscovered? Make them feel that sincerity. That's what sets you apart from the stack of impressive resumes. He absorbed her feedback instantly, rewriting his introductory statement with greater emotional depth. Their collaboration had become seamless, built on a foundation of honesty and trust that transcended the formality of their step relationship. While Reese finalized his preparation, Elara's mind drifted momentarily, drawn by a quiet pull she hadn't felt in years. She checked her phone for the second time in 10 minutes, a silly, girlish habit she thought she had long outgrown. Elias had texted, a simple, non-committal invitation, "Are you free for dinner Friday?" No pressure, just a continuation of the great conversation. The anticipation was a warm, unfamiliar counterpoint to the domestic routine. She recognized the spark she felt, but she consciously grounded it. This wasn't reckless infatuation, it was the quiet, profound appreciation of being truly seen by an attentive, intelligent stranger. It was a lifeline she hadn't known she needed. She was about to craft a thoughtful reply when Reese's desk phone rang, a rare occurrence. Reese looked at the caller ID, his face pale, and he looked at Elara, suddenly losing his professional composure. Reese, muttering, panicked, "Oh, God. It's the Labyrinth. They usually email. What if it's a cancellation?" Elara gave him a calm, steady look, reaching across the island to squeeze his arm firmly. "Elara, breathe. You have rehearsed this moment for 3 days. It's either a confirmation or a logistics call. Take it. You've got this." Reese swallowed, picked up the receiver, and answered with the controlled professionalism they had practiced. Elara watched his face closely, searching for the telltale signs of defeat. Instead, a slow, disbelieving smile began to spread. Reese, on the phone, voice gaining confidence, "Yes, I understand. Next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Yes, I have the address. I look forward to it. Thank you for the opportunity." He hung up the phone, and for a long moment, he just stared at the receiver, then let out a whoop of pure, unadulterated relief and victory. Reese, beaming, "I got it, Elara, I got the interview. 10 a.m. Tuesday. Face to face." The shared victory was palpable. Elara felt a surge of genuine maternal pride, a feeling that had nothing to do with her routine life and everything to do with her heart. She hugged him quickly, careful not to mess his tie. Elara, laughing, "I knew you would. Now, write down everything you remember about that call. Confirmation of time, the interviewer's name. You are in control of this, Reese." As Reese busied himself logging the details, the euphoria settling into focused determination, Elara finally reached for her phone to respond to Elias. That's when Reese looked up, his new emotional acuity fully engaged. He saw the soft, unguarded smile on her face as she looked at the screen, the slight flush on her cheeks. "Reese, observant, gentle, who is making you smile like that?" Elara looked up, startled by the directness. She hesitated for only a second, choosing honesty over evasion. "Elara, a friend. Someone I met yesterday morning at the Kettle. Elias. He's an artist. He asked me out for dinner on Friday." Reese leaned back in his chair, a knowing look in his eye. His smile softened, transitioning from one of personal pride to one of genuine care for her. "Reese, you should go. You absolutely should go, Elara. You told me the struggle stops now. That means for both of us." He paused, repeating the challenge he had thrown at her the day before, only this time, it felt like an official mandate. "Reese, anchors need maintenance too. Go let someone check your lines." Elara smiled, a true, unforced smile. She realized that by helping him face his world, she had inadvertently given herself permission to step back into her own. "Elara, Friday night it is. Now, let's go practice your opening pitch until you can recite it in your sleep."